First up, though, let's talk, well, definitely as a cover-up, and they certainly by the government and by Boris Johnson attempt to cover up what went on really behind the scenes when it comes to decisions being made during the COVID pandemic, whether we locked down, whether we didn't lock down, tiers, mask rules, closing schools, all of that. Well, we know it was all discussed on WhatsApp because that's pretty much how government was made and done during that period. We even had ministers having cabinet ministers on Zoom, often on mute. Government policy was made on WhatsApp, not made in a lot of meetings. So should the COVID inquiry have the right to demand all of ministers' WhatsApp messages during that time? Unredacted. Well, let's talk to a woman who knows all about seeing secret WhatsApp messages during that period. That's Isabel Oakeshott. She is, of course, the TalkTV's international editor and the journalist who exposed Matt Hancock's secret WhatsApps in the lockdown files. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia. And I've been thinking about this, and I don't think that there is a single other more important source than these WhatsApps. Now, it is extraordinary that we should be saying this, given that they are an informal record of what happened. But because of the way government was conducted at that time, as you referenced in your intro there, because of the rules that they made, normal meetings were not taking place and decisions were being taken at breakneck speed, often several decisions within the space of a few minutes that affected everybody's lives in this country. And they were being done by WhatsApp. We know this because of the lockdown files expose, which was only Matt Hancock's WhatsApps and not even all of them, because he mysteriously didn't give me a section of WhatsApps from one of the critical months, March 2020. But what we do have...
That's very interesting in itself, is it not? Yes.
Well, deeply suspicious, and I would like to know what happened to that month. Why did he not give it to me? Because he gave me pretty much everything else. But what we know is that provides, that cache of WhatsApps that we do have, provides an extraordinary insight into what was going on. And we now need the rest of the picture. I've never claimed it was the whole picture. Yeah. And we've got ministers refusing to hand them over. I'm not really surprised, because I'm sure that they are absolutely packed full of quite staggering revelations.
And that's the big worry, isn't it? Their argument is they shouldn't be unredacted because basically everything, because there'll be lots of private messages, and we understand that. But you know what? You know, if the police, came to the police and they thought there might be evidence in your phone, you'd have to hand your phone over. They'd be able to see everything on it. If it was written by email, in government emails, then we'd see it. But we've had government by WhatsApp. Look, you and I are both old enough to remember the Blair government, all that criticism of sofa government, that decisions were being made, and we had the Freedom of Information Act, and people were allowed to, ask for information. So everything suddenly was made on post-it notes, so they could remove the post-it note, throw it in the bin, and so there weren't records of events. Now everything's done on WhatsApp. But the thing is, I understand the need for government ministers and aides and advisors to be able to talk freely. I think that's really important, to know it's a safe place they can have that conversation. But when in having those conversations, they choose to then, well, basically take away our right to see our families, see our friends, go to work, to hug our parents, to see our loved ones when they're dying in hospital or elderly in a care home, or children to go to school. When they make those decisions that invade our privacy to such an extraordinary extent, they're allowed to say who I'm allowed to have in my kitchen or my garden. It seems to me it's a bit bloody rich for them to now say, but we need our privacy.
Well, it's frankly absurd. I've no doubt that there is loads of irrelevant and personal stuff in those files, just as there was with Matt Hancock. Now, it wasn't beyond the wit of a team of investigators to sift out what is overwhelmingly in the public interest and what isn't. Certainly the problem the COVID inquiry would have, if all these WhatsApps were handed over, would be one of time and resources to actually go through them. I mean,
I'm sure you'd volunteer your services.
100% I would. And I'm sure many others would besides. It would be fascinating to do that work, but I think it would delay the inquiry by at least a year if everything were handed over. But you can't have it both ways. And like you, I actually have no problem with government by WhatsApp, as long as it's government by WhatsApp that we can all see after the event.
And that's the key thing, is we know now from Matt Hancock's COVID messages during that time on WhatsApp that decisions weren't being made, as you and I knew all along from sources within government we were talking to during the pandemic. One of the reasons why we became anti-lockdown campaigners wasn't because, oh, we wanted grannies to die, we didn't care about people, we wanted to go to the pub. It's because we knew the decisions were not being based on data. I don't know about you, I was haranguing ministers off air as well as on air about their failure to actually look at the data when it became obvious to me that this was just a horrible, horrible mistake. But they, you know, they were making decisions based on personal ego, who'd messaged them last, what would look good in the papers the next day, what would be least embarrassing, what the opinion poll said. There is no evidence from Hancock's WhatsApp that any decision was made based on, we have new scientific data, we've examined it, we're now convinced that this is now necessary. And that is what is terrifying. Now, we know that the decision to lock down was one we thought the COVID inquiry was going to be all focused on. We should have locked down 2 weeks earlier and then no one would have died. I mean, a complete fallacy and a lie and nonsense. But actually, it does seem to have moved on from that now we'll know, I'm pretty sure we'll find out if we do see these WhatsApps, that actually the decision to lock down was a mad panic. Everyone else has locked down. We're going to have to lock down. We'll look awful if we don't sort of decision, rather than any change in the data that changed between what Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance were telling us mid-March and then what they were telling us a week later about why we had to lock down. And we have to have that information to enable us to move on and to never lock down again, because even now, even with all the data out of Sweden showing that lockdowns don't save lives, indeed they cost lives, younger people's lives, and ruin the economy, we are still in a situation where the vast majority of the media, public health bodies and government ministers and politicians are still saying it was the right decision.
Well, it may or may not have been the right decision. That's the whole point of the exercise of the COVID inquiry, which 2 years since it was ordered has yet to have a single public evidence session with key witnesses. Yeah. Now, that first session is supposed to be taking place next week. Baroness Hallett is not a woman to be trifled with, I have to say. I've been quite impressed so far with how she's managed this. She is making it very, very clear indeed she's going to take no nonsense on this and is prepared to go the full way in getting these WhatsApps. But endless obstructions are being put in her way. And when the government, in its attempted defence, says, well, you know, we've given her 50,000 documents, that's not actually helpful if you simply bombard the judge with a load of stuff which is not particularly pertinent. She said as much herself in the last pre-hearing session. It was quite evident that certain departments, including, by the way, the Department for Levelling Up and Michael Gove in particular, have swamped the inquiry with a lot of absolute flannel, stuff that they perfectly well know is not going to be useful to the inquiry. They are seeking to bog it down and turn it into a completely pointless, long drawn out, extraordinarily expensive exercise. We should have done, and we should be doing, what other countries like Sweden have done, not try to cover everything, because quite simply we won't then get any answers for another decade or so, at which point all of the key players will long be on to other things, and we may well have had another pandemic, and mistakes, catastrophic ones, could well be repeated.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, we'll see. 4 o'clock today is the deadline. We may well see that legal action, a judicial review by the government against its own COVID inquiry. Quite extraordinary scenes. No doubt we'll be talking about that on the show tomorrow as well. Isabel Oakeshott, thank you so much for joining us. 8:33 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast.